Hello everyone! Thank you for joining today's webinar, Implementing Test Automation, What a Manager Should Know. Don't forget to submit your questions to an email webinar@softserveinc.com, to live chat, or tweet us at SoftServeINC. We'll be happy to answer all of the questions at the end of the webinar during questions and answer sessions. And today with me is SoftServe's test automation expert, Sasha Reminey. Hi Sasha, how are you today?
Hi Ola, thank you. I'm really great because I have this perfect opportunity to share my knowledge about test automation because I have pretty long experience on implementing from scratch test automation projects. And it's a frequent situation that I should explain to managers or to other personnel how to get the most benefit of this implementation and what the return on investment would be and why actually any project might require test automation. So let me start just now and to speak a little about our agenda. So what we will cover today, first of all, it's important to identify if the project is at the right stage to start test automation. Then selecting the best approach for specific team, for specific resources given, and staff the right personnel in order to go further with this implementation. And also there is always seniors in any project, in any organization that would like to see test automation benefits only in numbers, only in reports, and not deeply anyway in technical implementation. So we were going to tackle this also a bit. The first thing is automation readiness. And there is a set of questions that any organization should ask themselves if they are considering this. So, if existing manual process is stable enough to automate, because as Dorothy Graham, icon of test automation in the world says, if you are trying to automate chaos, then you will get the same chaos, but faster. Is the target application actually suitable candidate for automation? Because definitely if it's too early stage of implementation, like 30% of functionality, then definitely before you reach your first release state, there will be so many improvements and changes in the code base itself of the product that test automation definitely would become outdated pretty shortly. Also, what do you expect from this automation? Will it bring any benefit? And also, if automation baseline will be maintainable with the company's current efforts and resources. What it means is that, do you have appropriate people to maintain this in the long run? And also, this is, I think, the last, but definitely not the least, maybe the most important thing, is if your stakeholder, if your client actually willing to invest into test automation, because otherwise you can just have a lot of headache and not any benefits. So mostly what we are going to speak about is functional test automation, meaning the workflows that manual testers are covering day after day. It's like creating user, validating that user is created, then deleting user, validating there is no information left in the system, and etc. So as for automation goals, you can reach those with two approaches. Quick and dirty approach can bring immediate benefit to your project. So for instance, if you have a manual tester or any person within the team who spends a lot of time by entering some forms on a web page or just populating the database, then you can write a set of simple scripts that will be a small subset of general automation for your project that will immediately allow to save lots of time, but definitely will be deprecated soon when this task is over. And this is an approach that allows us quick to production stage of the automation solution. Another approach is a long-term planning solution-based environment for automation. And environment dedication, what it means is where the system that will be tested will be actually hosted? Will this environment be shared with the same as manual testers use, or it will be a staging environment, or you will use some kind of subset of your production environment for automation? It's definitely something you need to plan in advance. Also, there is some parts of framework that you definitely need to implement, like connecting to your environment, to your continuous integration servers, building automatically the code, also having some results automatically reported into your issue tracking. All these are parts of the framework that you would like to set up before you start solution-based approach. And also, long-term supportability and continuous maintenance is very important for solution, because definitely there will be a lot of functional changes over the time within your product. And this is something that you would need to address as easy as possible. And coming back to this solution in 2 years, you would like to understand what you actually test with your test automation and to fix something as quickly as possible. So as for the staffing, with quick and dirty approach, to gain immediate benefit from your implementation of test automation, any applicable resources would be great. What it means is that if you have intern that doesn't have enough of work to do and he would like to discover something new, you can ask him to develop some pieces of test automation to cover some manual tasks. Or if you have a manual tester that is just tired of doing specific routine work, then you can ask him, or maybe he would be willing by himself to save the time and to invest some time into the world of test automation tools in order to convert some of his manual stuff into automated scripts. With solution-based, there's definitely one person that should be assigned to be a code owner of the automation solution, because he should review the test scripts, he should review the code base, he should be responsible and knowledgeable about all the changes inside of test automation solution, the same way as technical lead knows everything about product itself. The same way one person should be responsible for test automation. It's to avoid duplication, it's to provide long-term supportability. And important to mention that technology and language is not so important for test automation. This means in case your product is written in Java or .NET technologies, you can definitely start automating your product using Python, for instance. And this is just industry practice. These areas are not really connected between each other. But what you should consider before starting is that sometime later, a person who would implement the solution in Python might leave your team. And then it would be great if you would have some resources to back up this person, and that would be able to dig into the solution code base and to understand and to support this Python solution. So what I would like to emphasize is that software development is really different from implementing test automation. When we would speak about specific modules within software product, then there is separate modules, as I call them. For instance, on the screen you can several UI screens, that is UI 1, 2, 3, several business logic objects, services, database. And the most important during implementing those is actually interfaces, how user interface interacts with business logic, with services, database, etc. These are the most important areas, and these are usually implemented by most knowledgeable people on the project. And what is inside of each module, that part can be implemented by any person on the project. In case of test automation, situation is different, because each test script will in the same way interact with each UI screen or database or services in your product. Because one test script might do the login action, then It might navigate to a screen where you create your user, then to another screen where you see the contacts list within your system. Then it can go to database in order to verify that user created there, and then to allow some services calls. So all this means that each test script is not a separate module. It is a unique entity that tackles all the interfaces within your application. So it's a frequent situation that leads to code duplication, because each test script doing login, the same amount of code to do the login within each test script will actually needs to be removed afterwards. For test automation, there is certain areas that would require higher prioritization and would be more valuable to implement at once. Smoke Test Suite can be automated on early stages of the product, even before the first release. Smoke Test Suite is something that is run the most frequently. For instance, just to see that screens of the web application are actually loaded, just to see that some controls are only there, but no functional validation of what is specifically business logic of the product executing. Then Regression Test Suite. Regression Test Suite is a definite area for test automation, but more in a long run, because after some time, after first release, you will have regression test suites to rerun and rerun and rerun, and sometimes even more times rerun within your system. And specifically, it's very possible problem if you need to support with your web application several desktop platforms, several web browsers, which combines up to 15 or even more combinations of environments for the same application being run. In this case, regression test suite for automation brings great benefits. It's important to understand that you should never set up 100% of test automation coverage goal. It's just impossible. It's just impossible of the mathematics. You are never able to automatically test all the input combinations with all the output combinations. And there is definitely possibility that some functionality is easier to verify just manually, because it's too hard to automate those, like to get from the script into specific areas of your application. As an example, we could speak about web forms that would draw some graphs, that would draw something that is not a usual text box or a button. So in these cases, visual validation by manual tester might be much more valuable than implementing test automation for the same screen during several days or something. It's definitely a good area to automate something that is hard to do manually. It's a frequent example that I've seen before, that integration engines like BizTalk, TIBCO, etc. might be tested manually. What it means that person is creating XML texts that he or she pushes into the system, and afterwards trying to verify the result, how system processes these XML messages. And what it involves going to database several times. It involves going to TIBCO or other dashboards to verify that message was somehow translated. It also verifies getting into the rules engine of the integration system, integration engine, in order to see that all rule is applied. So it's really hard to do this stuff manually. But in the case of test automation, it's a question of a short script just to push XML from predefined file and to verify all this way going forward. And frequently repeated tasks. Again, as I said, when you create the same users over and over again and your database is just cleaned during the next build, then maybe test automation script will bring great benefit to your project. Interfaces to automate, they are really different. the most of the test automation code should be inside of unit tests. Then there is a services layer. Those are RESTful APIs, web APIs, SOAP APIs of the system, and then the least test automation should be placed on the UI level of the system. This is web UI, it's a desktop UI or mobile application user interface. What it takes to implement quick and dirty or solution-based approaches. For quick and dirty, as we said, there is not much of efforts needed to start and to get immediate benefit. So you can just start doing it at any point of time. For solution-based approach, you definitely need first to take some time to select the best tool, because it will be a long time when you are using this tool and implementing huge amount of test scripts using this automation tool. Then it's definitely needed to do architecture definition. So what amount of code would be covered on a unit, on a UI, on services layer? What is the architecture that will live inside of test automation in order to decrease as much as possible code duplication within this solution to provide long-term supportability? And also what those integrations with development environment that you will require. Again, it might be integration with your reporting engine, where automation would automatically show all the results for the test scripts, etc., etc., etc. So, tools. How to select tool? First of all, it's definitely worth looking what you have in-house. I had situations in my practice when getting into a new company and speaking about toolset, you could spend some time on defining the toolset, but then during the third day of investigation, you just find out by speaking to IT personnel that actually your company already invested in some test automation tools, and you definitely have, for instance, like HP Unified Test Professional, that is pretty comprehensive tool, and all that work that was related to actually trying different tools was not so much of benefit, or rather losing time, because these comprehensive tools can bring huge benefits at once. What we have open source. In case if you don't have something in-house, there is definitely areas that you should work at in the web for these automation tools. And you will find out that a lot of tools are pretty expensive. But for instance, if you have a good personnel to write test scripts, for instance, open source Selenium WebDriver framework is the most popular solution on the market for web test automation. So definitely take a look there. Maybe you don't need to buy anything, and it's better just to take an open source solution. Also, what market leaders are there in my area? Specifically, it applies for mobile test automation and desktop automation, where toolsets should be pretty comprehensive and pretty complex to handle all specific UI building technologies. As for the platform, there are tools that are multi-platform that cover web, desktop, mobile automation. As for the price, there is open source, as we mentioned, and also you should understand that there are proposals from different commercial organizations to have node-locked licenses, which means that this automation tool can be installed onto specific computer, specific workstation, and not anything else. And floating license, it's when you implement a license server within your organization, and you can have only one specific user using this test automation tool at a specific point of time. But after this person finishes usage, then this license can be taken by any other user. So floating license is actually up to 2 times are more expensive than node-locked. And also, it's about solution that these tools provide. Again, there are a lot of test automation tools that bring in enterprise-level experience when they can already easily integrate with the companies within your infrastructure in the company. And there are specific tools that are for specific technologies. For instance, SAP products, they have own product for test automation. If we would speak about return on investment, how to calculate this amount of benefit that you will get from implementing test automation is pretty simple. Actually, there are a lot of different variants how you can calculate, but what I would speak about is just measuring the time that it would take to manual tester to actually execute some test scripts and number of execution cycles during the sprint or during the release, and then what it takes from the time perspective to implement test automation to cover those manual efforts. And then just by replacing manual efforts with automation efforts and comparing those, you will be able to see how much of time you can actually save by using test automation only. And actually, you don't have to remove manual efforts at all. It's just certain parts of your manual efforts that might be automated and again bring benefit at once, and only this area will be compared to your manual efforts on the same area. So ROI calculation is pretty complex task somehow, and sometimes, but a SoftServe website and specifically its quality section already contains a calculator that allows to calculate ROI of test automation. So you can go right now to our website and experiment with this graph. So in case you would need any continuous support on this stuff, then please feel free to contact us and we will be pleased to help you with calculating ROI and understanding ROI of automation for your specific customers. If we would speak about planning automation and how we would say we are trying to approach any implementation from scratch, it's definitely the fact that plan and design stage of test automation should be performed with an expert, because it's one-time activity that actually dictates all the future implementation, execution, and maintenance of the full automation project. So we highly advise you not to create bicycles on your own, but to consult any available experts in this area, because again, selecting the tool, the right tool, might save you a lot of time and a lot of burden can be taken out of your head. So this is very important areas to cover. Also, what are the integration that you are expecting? What are the tricks how you can do this automation and save most of the time? For instance, one of the last cases I could cover is that project had a lot of APIs to test, and it was about 200 APIs. And from one perspective, to cover each API separately would take up to several months of time. But at the same time, writing test automation from like expert perspective, just a short script to automatically enumerate all these APIs and to validate that they are just alive took about several days. And it was very competitive to idea of implementing the same APIs during a long time. So this is a great benefit if you would invite expert. So developing, execution, and maintenance, this is areas we already tackled during previous slides. And these are easier when you have strategy in mind, when you have understanding of what you are going to automate, what this architecture that you are going to support within the solution, what are those tools that you are going to use. So thank you for your time. I hope that my comments and my ideas were valuable for you, and I would be pleased to hear if there are any answers on the line.
Thank you, Sasha, for such a wonderful presentation. So I would like to once again remind you that you can send your questions to webinar@softserveinc.com, to live chat or to Twitter, SoftServeInc. So let me check what we have in our inbox. Okay. So here's the first question. What about startups? Should they consider test automation?
So I should say that I'm pretty amazed how quickly first questions got into the inbox. My perspective about test automation in startup world, yes, considering test automation should definitely be in place. Why? Because in startup world, it's the most important area is getting as quickly to the market as possible, and this is something test automation really solves and empowers project with. But again, it depends on the stage of test automation. I mean, the product implementation itself, if test automation can be or cannot be introduced onto the project. So definitely should be considered, but if it should be implemented, depends on specific situation.
Great. Thank you, Sasha. So the next question, is it common for test automation engineers to write unit tests, and how frequent should they do this?
Yeah, very correct question, actually. So very specific, and I would say that although unit tests is part of test automation pyramid, it's really rare occasion when test automation experts would write unit tests. So this is mostly the work of actual developers implementing the source code of your project, because they know all the problems in the code they are writing. So it just makes much more sense if developer would write the unit test for his own code. And the industry standard for this coverage is about 80% of the functionality of the code coverage should be covered with unit tests. For sure, from organization to organization, this number differs, but this is something people should target.
Great. And I think the last question for today, all the rest can be answered through emails, or if you drop us a line like in social media, we'll get back to you. So we have invested huge money into test automation, but it is very hard to support, and so nobody uses. What can you advise on this?
This is actually also pretty common situation. So what happens is that in specific situations when people leave the project and have already implemented some kind of automation, it should be simple to understand for anybody getting into the code base. And again, because of code duplication issues, because of like language selection, for instance, again, if those people that implemented this from scratch used Python and anybody else just used Java, etc., it's very hard to support. Also, in case if you would start implementing test automation with very good developers, they would try to implement this with as much best practices in their mind as possible. For instance, they would use there as many like patterns, templates, transformations, that afterwards when like junior test automation looking at this code, and he would think, what is this, how it works? And in this case, it will be very specific situation, and automation just would be not supported because a person would just, people on the project would just reject it. So it really depends what happens specifically in your organization. So you can drop us another line and we can get in contact sometime later, so we could like speak about what should be done with your test automation. Definitely it shouldn't be thrown away. It might be just wrapped into a separate solution that will bring benefit, like provide like results as far as they are consistent with the product, but maybe continue implementation using other tools, technologies, etc.
Perfect. So thank you again, all of you who have joined us today, and thanks a lot, Sasha, for such a wonderful presentation. Hope our audience had an informative and fruitful time with us. and we look forward to seeing you at our next webinars.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.